Every one of us chases pleasure and runs from pain. But what if I told you that the secret to mastering both isn't about avoiding pain or seeking more pleasure? It's understanding how your brain assigns value to those sensations. Right now, your nervous system is running a program. It's interpreting signals, deciding whether something should hurt or feel good. And what's wild is, you can recode that program. Most people walk through life believing that pain and pleasure are opposites, as if they live on two separate tracks. But that's not how the brain works. What neuroscience shows us, what years of research and data make crystal clear, is that pain and pleasure aren't just connected, they're two ends of the same neural circuit, same pathway, and same neurotransmitters. The only difference is direction. When you understand this, everything about your life changes. The way you handle failure, the way you respond to discomfort, even the way you chase your goals. See, the very system in your brain that processes pleasure is the same one that processes pain. It's called the mesolimbic pathway, and it's wired to respond to anything that feels emotionally significant, good or bad. The same dopamine that surges when you achieve something great is also deeply involved in how you experience pain. Which means if you overstimulate your pleasure system, your sensitivity to pain goes up. And if you voluntarily endure pain, your access to pleasure becomes stronger. That's the paradox. And that's the secret very few are willing to confront. Now think about what this means. Every time you flood your brain with artificial pleasure, scrolling endlessly, chasing sugar, consuming easy rewards, you're actually overloading that system. You're dialing up the pleasure for a moment, but in doing so, you're setting yourself up for an eventual crash. And during that crash, your sensitivity to physical, emotional, even existential goes through the roof. You feel more anxious, you feel more drained, more disconnected, and most people have no idea why. They think they're broken. They think something's wrong with them. But nothing's wrong. Their system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Your brain doesn't give you pleasure for free. It's always trying to maintain balance, what scientists call homeostasis. When dopamine spikes too fast and too high, it has to come back down. And when it comes down, it usually dips below baseline before stabilizing. That's the pain part. That's why when you binge on easy dopamine, whether it's junk food, gambling, or scrolling TikTok for an hour, you feel worse afterward, not better. And if you keep repeating that loop, your brain adapts. It becomes less responsive to the pleasure and more reactive to the pain. Over time, you're left feeling numb when you should feel joy and overwhelmed when you should feel strong. But here's where it gets interesting. That same circuit, the one that makes you feel stuck, is also the one that can set you free. Because pain doesn't just follow pleasure. It can precede it. And when it does, the brain responds differently. When you voluntarily endure discomfort, when you choose the cold, choose the grind, choose the silence, you activate that same pathway, but in a way that leads to long-term strength. The dopamine release becomes more gradual, more sustainable, more meaningful, and it's not followed by a crash. It's followed by growth. Think about the most fulfilling moments in your life. I guarantee they came after effort, after pain, after some form of struggle, whether it was getting through a tough workout, pushing through a difficult project, or facing a personal fear. You earned it, and because you earned it, your brain registered it differently. It wasn't just a spike. It was a signal that said, this is who I am now. That's the kind of pleasure that rewires you. That's the kind of growth that sticks. This is why learning to control your experience of pain and pleasure starts with one fundamental idea. They're not enemies. They're not even separate. They're a cycle. And if you treat them like a cycle, you can start to steer it. You can decide when to lean into the pain, when to hold back on the pleasure, and when to use both as tools. Tools for resilience and tools for power. Tools for becoming the kind of person who doesn't just survive pressure, but thrives in it. You want to change your life? Then start here. Don't chase comfort. Don't run from discomfort. Learn the circuit. Respect the cycle. And you'll no longer be a victim of your chemistry. You'll be the commander of it. Your brain is constantly tracking your internal state, especially when it comes to motivation. And the core driver of that motivation, it's dopamine. Now, most people think of dopamine as the pleasure chemical, but that's not exactly accurate. Dopamine is not about pleasure itself. It's about the anticipation of reward. It's the signal that says, that thing over there, it's worth moving toward. And the moment we understand that, we begin to realize why our world is struggling so much with burnout, apathy, and mental fatigue. See, every time you reach for your phone, every time you bite into something sugary, every time you scroll for something exciting, your brain gives you a tiny pulse of dopamine, a little reward for very little effort. And the more often you repeat that behavior, the more your brain adapts to it. It starts expecting that stimulus. But here's where it turns against you. With each artificial dopamine hit, your baseline dopamine level begins to drop. And this is key, because your baseline is what determines how motivated, focused, and energized you feel throughout your day, not the spikes. The baseline, when your baseline drops, everyday life starts to feel flat. You wake up feeling tired even if you slept. Work becomes harder to engage with. Conversations feel dull. Exercise feels impossible. Not because anything around you has changed, but because your system is no longer tuned for effort-based reward. It's tuned for cheap highs. And this is where people get trapped. They don't feel motivated, so they chase more stimulation, more sugar, more screens, more noise. But every time they do, the baseline drops further. And that cycle leads to a condition we call dopamine depletion. A state where nothing feels exciting anymore, not even the things you once loved. Now, the good news, your brain is plastic. It can change. And the way out of this loop is simple, but not easy. It starts by recognizing that not all dopamine is created equal. The dopamine you earn through effort, through delayed gratification, and through struggle, that kind of dopamine doesn't crash your system. It builds it. It restores balance, but you only get it when you work for it. That's the trade-off. The brain rewards what is difficult. And the more you lean into hard things, the stronger and more stable your baseline becomes. You want to reset your dopamine system, then step back from the things that spike it artificially. That means taking intentional breaks from overstimulation, social media fasts, cold exposure instead of comfort food, focusing on one task instead of 10. Not because those things are bad, because your system needs space to recalibrate. Dopamine levels rise and fall in a very predictable way. And if you don't give them time to return to baseline, if you keep spiking the system, you never allow the brain to reset. You're constantly depleting the fuel tank without ever refilling it. One of the most powerful protocols is actually boredom. That's right, boredom. Because when you allow yourself to be still, when you resist the urge to constantly feed your brain stimuli, your dopamine receptors start to resensitize. You begin to notice the subtle rewards again. The satisfaction of deep work, the joy of real conversations, the energy that comes from a real workout. And all of that becomes possible only when you stop flooding your brain with constant micro rewards. Effort releases dopamine after the work is done. It's a delayed system. And that's exactly what gives it power. Because once your brain learns that real satisfaction comes from action, not from consumption, it starts craving the right things. Discipline becomes desirable. Consistency becomes rewarding, and you don't have to force it. It becomes your new baseline. There's a part of your brain, your ancient wiring, that's built not just to survive discomfort, but to thrive through it. You weren't designed to live in constant ease. You were built for challenge, built for friction, built for stress in the right dose and under the right conditions. The issue is most people spend their lives avoiding pain at all costs. They think if something is hard, it must be wrong. If it's uncomfortable, it must be bad. But what they don't realize is that pain, when applied deliberately and in controlled doses, is the exact trigger that teaches your body and brain to grow stronger, sharper, more resilient. Controlled discomfort, intentional, structured discomfort is one of the most powerful ways to train your nervous system. You don't need to wait for a crisis to build strength. You can design challenge into your life. You can step into it on purpose. Cold exposure, intense physical effort, endurance training, fasting, even mental endurance tasks. These aren't punishments. They're tools. Tools that condition your system to stop overreacting to pain and to start adapting to it. Because when you voluntarily enter discomfort, your brain learns something critical. This isn't a threat. This is a signal to grow. You see, when pain is unexpected, when it's chaotic, your system goes into a defensive state. It closes off. It resists. But when you choose that pain, when you walk into it willingly, it changes everything. The brain no longer treats it as a threat. It treats it as training. And over time, that shifts your entire response to stress. You don't panic when things get hard. You don't retreat. You engage. You focus. You breathe deeper because your nervous system has learned to respond with intention, not fear. Let's take something as simple as a cold shower. To most people, it seems pointless, unnecessary. But what it actually does is put your system under acute short-term stress. Your heart rate spikes, your breath shortens, your body screams for comfort. And if you stay in that discomfort just a little longer, if you breathe through it, you're teaching your brain a new pattern. You're training your autonomic nervous system to stay calm under pressure, to respond, not react. That's a skill. And it translates everywhere: business, relationships, health, discipline. Or take fasting, not starving yourself, but deliberately skipping food to teach your body how to manage without constant input. Most people eat not because they're hungry, but because they're bored or emotional. Fasting breaks that loop. It introduces a gap between craving and action. And in that gap, you train power, you train control. You start to learn that your urges are not commands, they're suggestions. And you can override them. Every time you engage in these kinds of practices, you're building a kind of internal armor. Not to become numb, but to become clear, because clarity comes when you strip away comfort. And that clarity gives you the power to respond to life's real stresses: financial pressure, emotional pain, uncertainty, not with collapse, but with calm execution. But this only works if the discomfort is voluntary. If you wait for life to impose pain on you, you'll be reactive, you'll resist, you'll shrink. But if you take the initiative, if you step into controlled adversity, you own the process. You tell your brain, I'm not afraid of discomfort. I'm not running from challenge. I'm choosing it. And over time, your brain adapts. Neuroplasticity kicks in. Your stress threshold increases. Your capacity to stay composed under fire improves. Your endurance, mental, emotional, and physical, goes up. And the same things that used to break you now barely shake you. Controlled discomfort isn't about being tough for show. It's about building a system that stays stable when everything around you becomes unstable. It's about knowing that when chaos hits, and it always will, you've already trained for it. You've already practiced staying grounded while everything screams at you to quit. That's the power of structured pain. It doesn't just build muscle. It builds character. It builds awareness. It builds a nervous system that doesn't collapse under pressure, but becomes sharper inside it. And that edge, earned through voluntary discomfort, is what separates those who survive from those who lead. When you seek the hard path on purpose, you become the kind of person who doesn't just endure challenge. You command it. There's a fundamental rule when it comes to the human brain. If you get pleasure without putting in effort, the reward is fleeting and the cost is high. Pleasure that's unearned doesn't just lose its value over time. It erodes your motivation, it weakens your resilience, and it trains your brain to expect something for nothing. That's a dangerous loop, because every time you experience pleasure without work, without a struggle, you send your nervous system a distorted message. This is how life should feel all the time, but that's not reality, and your brain knows it. We are wired to work for reward. That's how our dopamine system was built. It's not just about the high, it's about the harsh pursuit of the high, the process, the striving, the challenge. When you delay gratification, when you struggle through something difficult, and then you hit the reward, that dopamine hit is 10 times more powerful. Not only does it feel better, it actually strengthens the circuits that regulate motivation, discipline, and self-control. Your system becomes more capable of long-term effort. And in the long run, that's what determines who wins. Now think about what happens when pleasure comes easily. No effort, no discipline, no process, just instant reward. That could be junk food, scrolling social media, numbing entertainment, substances. These things light up the brain quickly, but they do it in a way that bypasses the natural sequence of effort, struggle, and reward. And the cost of that shortcut is steep. Every time you choose the shortcut, the dopamine spike is followed by a dippy below baseline. That crash doesn't just make you feel low, it makes it harder for you to feel motivated again. It creates a kind of emotional and energetic debt. And the more often you do it, the deeper that debt gets. But here's the truth. It's not the pleasure itself that's the problem. Pleasure is not the enemy. The problem is when pleasure comes without, earning it, when it's not tied to any kind of challenge, any kind of growth. Because in those moments, your brain doesn't have a reference point. It doesn't know why it feels good. It just knows it didn't have to do anything for it. That's when motivation begins to erode. That's when goals lose their fire. That's when life starts to feel meaningless. When you earn pleasure, when it's the result of deliberate, focused effort, the brain processes it differently. The dopamine spike is more gradual. It's more sustainable. It's not followed by a crash. It's followed by pride, by energy, by momentum. That's the reward system functioning the way it was designed to. You finish a hard workout, you hit a deep breakthrough in your work. You get through a difficult conversation. Those moments release dopamine in a way that builds you. They reinforce the connection between effort and reward. And once your brain locks onto that loop, you become a different kind of person. You stop chasing easy highs. You start leaning into hard things because you want the reward that only comes on the other side of struggle. And more importantly, you start respecting yourself in the process. That's what earned pleasure gives you. It's not just about the dopamine. It's about the identity. You become someone who doesn't wait for life to hand them joy. You create it through grit, through discipline, through consistent action. And that kind of joy, earned, not given, changes how you move through the world. This is why delayed gratification is so powerful. It's not just a moral principle. It's a biological truth. When you delay the reward, your brain becomes more invested in the process. You stay more focused. You handle setbacks better. You build patience. And patience is not just waiting. It's the ability to keep working even when the reward isn't immediate. That's the real edge. That's the mental advantage high performers have. Pleasure should come after the pain, after the sweat, after the uncertainty, because then and only then does it reinforce the habits that actually move your life forward. That's how you stay sharp. That's how you stay hungry. And that's how you wire yourself for success that lasts. Pleasure isn't bad. It's just not free. The more you earn it, the more it builds you. The more you chase it without effort, the more it breaks you. Choose wisely. Earn it every time. There's a moment between stimulus and response that most people never take advantage of. It's the space where your power lives, the space where you decide whether you panic or stay calm, whether you react or respond. And in that space, the two most underrated tools you have are your breathe and your vision. Most people think those are just passive functions, background systems. But in reality, they are direct levers into your nervous system. You can use them to take control of your mind and body, especially when you're experiencing stress, pain, or overwhelming emotion. Let's start with the breath. When you're in pain, whether physical or emotional, your breathing changes. It becomes shallow, fast, erratic. That's not random. And that's your body preparing for a threat. It's a survival response, part of your sympathetic nervous system. The problem is when you stay in that breathing pattern too long, your brain gets stuck in a stress loop. And what that means is even if the danger passes, your body keeps reacting as if the threat is still there. But here's the key: you can reverse that loop, not with medication, not with force, just with awareness and breath. If you slow your breathing down, especially the exhale, you send a signal to your brainstem and to the entire body that says, I'm safe. I can handle this. You don't need a perfect technique. Just slow your inhale through the nose and then extend your exhale longer than your inhale. Do it a few times, even in the middle of discomfort, and your body starts to shift. Your heart rate drops. Your pupils relax. Your thinking clears. You gain access to the higher functions of the brain again, the parts that deal with logic, focus, and decision-making. But breath is only half the equation. Vision plays a role just as powerful. When you're under stress or in pain, your eyes narrow, your field of view contracts. You go into what's called foveal vision, a hyper-focused tunnel that primes you to fight or flee. Again, totally natural, but it keeps your brain locked in a reactive state. The way out of that state is to deliberately shift your eyes into panoramic vision. Instead of staring at one point, expand your awareness to the edges of your visual field. See the room around you, the light, the space. That shift, just like slow breathing, signals to your nervous system that the environment is no longer a threat. You're not stuck with your automatic responses. You're not a prisoner to pain. You can train your physiology to handle stress like an operator, calm, controlled, clear. And it doesn't take a miracle. It just takes consistency. You start small. When the pressure rises, and instead of escaping the situation, you stay. You breathe, you widen your view, you feel the sensation in your body, and you anchor yourself in the moment. This is how elite performers in every domain, from combat to sports to business, train their system. They don't eliminate stress. They build the capacity to stay grounded while stress is happening. And that comes from mastering these basic tools: the breath, the eyes, the internal language that says, I've been here before. I know how to control this state. And when you can control your state and you can control your behavior, and when you control your behavior, you control your outcomes. The beauty of this is that it's accessible to everyone. You don't need to be an athlete or a monk or a scientist. You just need to be intentional. You need to decide that you will no longer let stress hijack your life. That when pain shows up, you won't collapse. You'll breathe deeper. You'll look wider. You'll hold the line, not because you feel fearless, but because you've trained your system to respond with strength, not panic. There's nothing soft about breath work. There's nothing passive about vision control. These are weapons. These are anchors. And when you use them regularly, they become habits. And in those habits, hardwire a kind of inner stability that shows up when everything else around you is falling apart. Your power isn't just in your thoughts. It's in your physiology. Use it wisely, use it consistently, and it will never fail you when you need it most. One of the most overlooked forces driving human behavior, especially in how we deal with pain and pleasure, is identity. Who you believe you are shapes how your nervous system reacts to challenge, to discomfort, to reward. Identity isn't just mindset. It's a filter through which every experience is interpreted. Two people can feel the exact same stress, the same pain, and walk away with completely different responses. One collapses, the other grows. Why? Identity. One saw it as something that happened to them. The other saw it as something that happened for them. That difference changes everything. When you start to define yourself not by what you feel, but by how you respond to what you feel, you take ownership of your experience. Pain becomes data. Discomfort becomes a signal, not a sentence. You begin to understand that the strongest people in the world aren't the ones who avoid pain. They're the ones who see meaning in it. They tie the pain to purpose. And when pain has a purpose, it doesn't drain you. It drives you. Your brain is constantly scanning for meaning. It wants to understand why something hurts. If the pain feels random, chaotic, unfair, your system reacts with fear, frustration, even despair. But if you give that pain a role, if you connect it to a bigger reason, this pain is shaping me. This pain is part of the process. This pain is temporary, but the growth is permanent. Then your entire neurochemical response shifts. Cortisol, adrenaline, dopamine, they're released in a different sequence. You don't shut down. You lean in. The problem is most people never there take the time to update their identity. They're still living through the lens of a person they no longer actually were, or never they identify as weak, as a victim, as someone who can't handle adversity. And so their nervous system obeys. It interprets every challenge as a threat, every inconvenience as a disaster. But identity is not fixed. It's not something you're born with. It's something you build. And you build it one decision at a time. When you repeatedly choose to face pain instead of avoiding it, your brain updates the internal story. It starts to say, we're the kind of person who can handle this. When you train consistently, even when you don't feel like it, that identity gets reinforced. When you delay gratification, show up when it's hard, keep your word when no one's watching, you're not just stacking habits. You're reinforcing a message to your nervous system. I am built for pressure. I don't break under fire. I use pain as fuel. And this is how you take back control, not just through hacks or tricks, but through identity alignment. When your actions align with the person you're trying to become, the nervous system follows. It recalibrates. The brain learns that pain isn't a stop sign. It's a green light. It's not something to fear. It's something to follow. And when pleasure does come, it's not hollow or fleeting. It lands deeper because you know you earned it. It's congruent with your path, not a distraction from it. You have to ask yourself, who am I becoming when I choose comfort over growth? When I escape instead of endure? And on the flip side, who am I becoming when I do the hard thing, when I say no to the easy way, when I show up anyway? That identity isn't built in a single moment. It's forged in the repetition, in the daily decision to link your discomfort to something bigger than the pain itself. The most powerful shifts happen when pain and purpose collide. When you stop asking, and if you, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this shaping in me? That's when you gain leverage. That's when your brain stops seeing you as fragile and starts seeing you as capable. And once that happens, once your nervous system trusts your identity, everything changes, focus improves, stress becomes fuel, and pleasure no longer controls you, you control it. Your identity isn't who you were. It's who you repeatedly choose to become. Choose wisely. You